So, hello and welcome. My name's Steve Nobel, and today I'm speaking with Malcolm Stern on Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, 10 Ways to Thrive, even when it feels impossible. Now, Malcolm, I know Malcolm for years because we both worked at Alternatives, but Malcolm has worked as a group and individual psychotherapist for more than 30 years, and he's the co-founder of Alternatives at St. James's Church in London, and runs groups internationally, specialises in conflict as a force for change and authentic leadership. And he's the co-author of Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. And this book describes 10 practices for thriving in an unstable world, which we all know about. The world's a bit crazy at the moment, isn't it? All distilled from his 30 years of intense group work. And the book is filled with practical exercises, which are combined with real and compelling stories from the therapy room. His website is malcolmstern.com. And I've just got to say this at the beginning, that Eckhart Tolle, who we know, this amazing spiritual teacher, author, says Stern's invaluable book, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, shows how unconditional acceptance and the power of awareness can help us transcend the suffering caused by unconscious mental emotional conditioning, and thus bring about redemption and healing from the man himself. There we are. How did you get that? How much did you pay him, Malcolm?
Well, it's really hard getting Eckhart because he's so busy. But we put him on at the Albert Hall in 2019. And I took my manuscript, which was almost done at that stage, and I said, "Would you be open to endorsing it?" And he said, "I'll have a look at it." And I said, "Look, you know, if you're going to read it, I'll give you the manuscript." And he said, "I'm on tour at the moment. I'll read it." It took him 6 months, but he did come up with a little gem. And he's a lovely bloke, you know. So I just think, and he wouldn't have done it if he hadn't liked the book, if the book hadn't touched him as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the book is fantastic. And the first question I have for you, Malcolm, is what made you write this book?
There's a question that takes me right into my heart center, Steve. You know, so it's in 2014, my daughter Melissa took her own life. I was in the middle of running a group at the time, at the end of my one-year group, which was a 5-day residential. And I heard during the lunch break that Melissa had died. And I went back into the group, got one of the people to run the session for me. And he set up a grief circle. And so we all stood there, and he said, "Those who've lost a parent, step into the middle." And most people stepped into the middle. "Those who've lost a sibling, step into the middle," 3 or 4. "Those who've lost a close friend, step into the middle. Those who've lost a child." And at that moment, I was the only person. I stepped into the middle, and something landed. The grief suddenly set in. And I went, "Oh my God, I am now dealing with this as a bereaved father." And it took until 2017 for the idea of the book to come along. I'd started writing bits and blogs and this and that, but I felt like I needed to exorcise Melissa's story. It's not a grief memoir, but I needed to actually see what I'd understood. I realized that I had actually got a lot of practices that I was already using without consciously naming them. And so what I realized is I could put this all down. And I thought I was writing a sort of like a sort of a how-to document for people who'd read the book. What I realized is I was writing it for myself, first and foremost. I was writing what it is that I needed to keep practicing in order to stay stable. Because the world, as we said, you said earlier, Steve, is very unstable. And I felt like my stability was really, when you lose a child, your stability is really shattered.
Yeah, I remember at Alternatives when that happened, and just feeling how well you dealt with it. Actually, I mean, I've got 2 children. I wouldn't want them to go before me. So
no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't.
No. So in your book, you write this brilliant piece where you said the human condition means we all suffer. I think you there's a part of you that's Buddhist. You know, you've got the Jewish part, the Buddhist part.
Interestingly, I have a really lovely. You know, I think my favourite endorsement is actually from Lama Chimi Rinpoche, who's one of the close friend of the Dalai Lama. And he says some of the methods Malcolm describes are close to the Buddhist philosophy, focused on the practices of conscious living, not rejecting, but looking closely at our problems, becoming aware of them, and allowing the space for them to transform and liberate us. And although I'm not a formal Buddhist, I think I have a great deal of empathy with the Buddhist philosophy. It's a philosophy for me, not a religion.
Yeah. Well, you say the human condition means we all suffer, sometimes dramatically, sometimes in quiet desperation, sometimes acting out in bizarre ways, sometimes sobbing quietly in the solitude of our own room. The organisation Mind states that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health issue in any 1 year in the UK. And for me, you say, for me, mental health is no different from physical health. So this is a book about suffering, and is coping the right word? Maybe moving through it? Is that?
I would say it's transcending. It's even thriving. You know, I can see the times in my life where I've suffered, and I can either go, oh my God, why does this happen to me? Or what are the resources that I can bring into play to actually enrich myself, to thrive through this? So one of the examples I could say to you is that last September, I had a heart attack and I was blue lighted to hospital. And I was told by the surgeon afterwards it was a severe heart attack. And he put a stent in, he sort of straightened me out. But at the time when I was in the ambulance, I suddenly thought I was at the moment of panic, and then there was a moment of unbelievable calm. And I thought, well, if this is my time to die, then it's my time to die. And I felt at peace with it. And when I was in the hospital, I was in the ward, and there's all these people who are scared stiff. And I sort of formed a little encounter group around the ward. You know, I had people talk about what was going on, not consciously, but it was like, that was one of the ways I was doing it. And suddenly I saw all these beautiful beings. And I realized that actually I could go, oh my God, I'm in hospital. There's terrible food. I'm in a ward. I could die, blah, blah, blah. But I'm actually surrounded by people in fear, including me. And actually we could do something with this. And so for me, that was a thriving that happened from that heart attack.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because I've known in my own life that when I've come up against suffering or extreme challenges, it's made me go deeper. It's a bit like that Saturnian thing, isn't it? It's made me go deeper in myself and made me grow up in some ways, I think. Do you think there's that kind of deepening?
I think there is. I think we either sink or swim. And like for me, I'm doing swimming lessons in this book.
So one of the things you say, slaying your dragons with compassion, is the art of speaking difficult truths, things that are hard to hear for everyone and painful for you to suppress. Can you say something more about this, about kind of communicating with compassion?
Yeah. So say, for example, you're in a relationship and you're having a difficult time with your partner. Now, you may have a very good persona that is all, and I've got clients like this, people who are always saying the right thing, never wanting to sort of put blame out, wanting to manage everything, but actually keeping things at a surface level. And my sense is when we keep things at a surface level, we never really get to access what it is we have to say. So what I've seen actually when I've spoken my truth, and I'm learning to speak my truth compassionately where I can, is that actually there can be a real transformation that comes from that. And it's scary because you can actually, I'm not even talking about just the physical one-to-one relationship. In all our relationships, if we learn to speak truth, we become trustworthy. And so we can be nice guys, or we can actually sort of like be honest, authentic human beings. And that's a practice.
Yeah, I guess that kind of practice alone would probably save a lot of relationships, wouldn't it? Or sort out a lot of problems earlier on. Because in relationship, I remember my father saying a story that for the first 2 years of his marriage, my mother made him these kind of packed lunches. And then after 2 years, he said, I can't bear them anymore. And it was like, really, you stood 2 years of this horrible cheese sandwich or whatever she was making, I don't know. And my mother, she would, if she was on a winning formula, she'd stick to it until you say enough. She was a bit like that.
And it's like drawing boundaries. It's like having real communication. But actually, we can. It's like minor suffering of sandwiches he didn't particularly want. But actually, it's like the problem is if we get to that stage of suppression for months and months and months, when it does come out, it often explodes. So, you know, like, it's like, you know, you've ruined my life, you bitch. If someone says, you know, pass me the salt cellar, please. It's just like,
yeah. I think in America where, you know, everything's kind of, this might be a generalization, have a nice day. And there was this kind of spate of kids who were like these apple pie, wonderful kids shooting their parents, you know.
Oh, yeah.
You think, what's happening in those families, really?
Well, that's the shadow for you. You know, the shadow will out. If you suppress the shadow, if you pretend that you're just nice, it ain't the truth.
Yeah.
You maybe if you're the Buddha or you're the Jesus or you're the Dalai Lama, maybe it is the truth. And maybe it's been hard won. But for you and I, there's going to be a side of us that's not very pretty.
Yeah. And it's embracing that and being okay with that, I guess. So
yeah.
Another thing you talk about in the book is bearing witness. And you say bearing witness means opening to the world with full sensitivity. It can be overwhelming to see the rawness of another person's emotions, the psychic punch of anger, It demands a willingness to stick with uncomfortable feelings despite our natural instinct to escape from pain and discomfort. So staying with difficulty, you're talking about there.
I think that's the thing, is like seeing that it has a message for us. You know, what we often tend to do, and you know, I know what I learned from my mother was diversionary tactics. So things get difficult, you divert. You know, I'd fall over as a child, she'd say, oh, come and have a sweet, rather than, what's happening? And I think we can tend to divert very easily and avoid difficult feelings, but actually difficult feelings can often take us down and show us something.
Yeah. There's another bit you say, choose your battles. My friend Simone has two potent sayings saying, what is the battle you're willing to die in a ditch for? And you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. I mean, this is brilliant. I think that's quite Buddhist as well, especially the second bit, isn't it?
And interestingly enough, my friend Simone is actually a Christian priest. So that's quite interesting.
Really?
But she's got a real openness to Buddhism as well. So yes.
Because I remember when you were alternative, you were talking a lot about, was it Hermann Hesse?
Yes, he's definitely my literary hero. Yes.
And I'm sure there is kind of Buddhist staying with extreme suffering, isn't it? Again, that is he the guy who was in the concentration camp? Is that right?
No, that's Viktor Frankl. So he's also a hero of mine. So Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Oh, and actually he transcended his suffering in the concentration camps. He became enlightened through his suffering. That's very rare.
Oh, yeah, incredible. Incredible.
He awoke through his suffering. So did Eckhart, by the way. Eckhart used to sleep on park benches. When we knew him in the early days of alternatives, he was a bum.
So there's hope for us all.
There you go, Steve. You and me too. Yes. Yeah.
So what about choosing our battles? You know, we don't have to attend every argument we're invited to.
Yeah, I love that statement.
What would you say about that?
I'd say sometimes people want to get at us, you know, and it's like, and then we get caught in having a sort of like a dialogue when actually we don't want it. There might be people, for example, who you don't really want to know that well, who really want to get to you. And actually there's something wise about saying, I'm not going there, not because you're avoiding it, but just because you don't want to engage in something that's going to be life denying and is not going to bring benefit to either of you. It's just a ranting space that you want to create. Yeah. You say in the book, stand firm in the face of conflict. Next time, I'm so impressed that you've obviously read this book through and through. It's great.
This is amazing because this is the opposite, isn't it? Don't attend every argument somebody offers you. And the other side is stand firm in the face of conflict. Sometimes we have to stand firm.
Yes.
I remember reading in a David Data book around what he said was women want the killer in you. Talking about men, meaning they don't want to blow you over, and this is kind of a little bit the same. Sometimes you got to stand firm and go, this is who I am in my core energy.
Yeah, when I first got involved with sort of spiritual seeking, many decades ago, I was practicing being loving. What I thought was loving, and so I would say the right things. I'd tell people how beautiful they were. In my workshops, I'd have people look in each other's eyes and see the soul quality of each human being, which is there.
Yeah.
But actually, what I ignored was all the stuff, and without the stuff, you can only go so far. And so when stuff comes at you, it's not about standing firm and saying, well, sod you, I'm not going to go there. It's about standing firm and actually going, I'm not going to be blown over. Exactly what you said about David Data. I'm not going to be blown over, because actually a woman, with a man, and it's not just a woman with a man, but we as human beings, if we see that someone's solid, it means we can engage at a much deeper level than if they're sweet. Sweet and nice are not good words.
And maybe we can even trust them more because we're not, our anger is not making them run away. We can, or our assertiveness. Yeah. And
in a relationship, I mean, Barry Long, who is not a fan, I'm not a particular fan of, but he did say one thing that's amazing. He said, the man who hasn't met the fiendess in a woman hasn't really met the woman. And so, there's if you can get to the place where you can really go blast at another, I don't mean you do that all the time, because that then becomes a lunatic asylum. But what I'm talking about here is blasting, that actually, if you can withstand the rage and learn to be with it, you build the relationship.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, in Britain, I've come from a family which was, we don't really show emotions here. We talk about superficial things, anger. I mean, my mother would blow up once every 3 or 4 years, but that was allowed. She would have an explosion and everything went back to normal. But it's kind of like, and then anger becomes scary because there's this volcanic eruption and everything becomes still again. It's not really talked about. So it became very, very weird. I think that's why I went on my journey. I'm like, I don't understand this family. And so then I married into a Portuguese family that showed me the whole emotional spectrum, which was brilliant.
Ah, great.
You know, it's fantastic. So you say in your book, win-win, which I really like, the whole concept of win-win, but you say, if you shame another in the journey of establishing your rightness and their wrongness, that may come back to haunt you. Far better to have both parties completing a dialogue and coming away from it feeling a sense of achievement. There is this kind of win-lose game, isn't there, in relationships and in life and in business, that people, even if you're a winner, in the end, you're going to be a loser.
If you lord it over someone, they always say, like, watch out for who you harm on the way up, because you might meet them on the way down as well. But if we look at this in a macrocosmic sense, we look at the world. Take a look at Germany after World War I. Germany was smashed and was shamed. And all that happened is it went underground and regurgitated into World War II, which was one of the most horrendous conflicts, obviously, ever on the planet.
Yeah.
But the circumstances were created for that by the need for one side to win and the other side to lose. And if we can treat people with dignity when we have actually sort of come one up on them, but we've actually engaged in a dignified dialogue, I think there's something about that. Actually, they don't need to have their faces rubbed in the dirt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into, we talked a bit about love and relationships and sex. Let's dive in, because we both know about the whole we've been around the block a couple of times.
A few times, Steve, yeah.
So you say falling in love is the temporary lifting of critical faculties. Any idiot can do it. It requires no skills. You just have to step on the magic carpet and go for the ride. However, loving is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
This, I mean, as a kid, I didn't have any idea about relationships and love. Loving and falling in love, or even fancying people. It was a whole confusing mess. I guess it's for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, also, it's like we then get taken over by the chemicals in our body. You know, you meet someone, you fall in love with them, and suddenly it's like you're with the goddess, you're with the divine. But of course, they're more than that as well. And if you just hold them in that place, eventually the relationship's going to topple, because you've got them on a pedestal and they're not for real.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what is the difference between falling in love and loving then? What is loving as a whole different ballgame? What is that?
I think loving is a practice. Loving is, every day waking up and actually sort of maybe, for example, I do a gratitude meditation most mornings. I think of 3 things that I'm grateful for in my life. And I think loving is a bit like that we can actually sort of like, we can see the person with fresh eyes. We can see that here's another soul like us who's giving their precious life to spend with us. And actually we could practice deepening the relationship through the practices of authenticity, through the practice of bearing witness, through a number of different things that actually we can, through daring to express our emotions. In the early stages of being in love, none of that happens. So I remember seeing my hairdresser telling me once that he'd met this woman and she's so amazing. She even wanted to go to Arsenal with him. And I said, I thought to myself, you wait. It's like at the moment she's fulfilling your every dream, but actually that's not going to be how it is long term. So there's a practice of loving, even when that person is difficult, even when you're difficult. If you can actually work it through. Some of the best relationships I know are people who have been married for 30 plus years. They've really managed to deepen their relationships to the level where they know and trust each other, and they're not in hiding from each other. And falling in love is in hiding at some level.
Well, our mutual friend Tom, who's now passed over, I asked him once, because he was married for 40 something years. I said, what's the secret of your success? He kind of said, taking time they would take time to go on holiday separately, sometimes together, or they would do separate things and come together. And I thought, oh, that's really, because it's good to know how does it work, Tom? How does this work?
And I think it works differently for every couple, but I think that's a very good practice actually to not lose yourself in another, because then you become like a little island that's not in the world. Tom was really in the world, and he had a lot of passion, but that relationship was never in the way of the passion, but the relationship wasn't excluded from his passion either.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Now you talk about sex. I love this statement. You say we have to learn that sexual passion is like a confidence trick the universe plays in order to bring people together. I've often thought that actually. It's very clever. I mean, someone's worked it out. These guys are not going to get together unless we do something like this. You need to see what the relationship is like after the initial intensity has faded. That's so true, because I think lots of people fall in love with the body, the form, the beauty, and not the essence of the person. And then it doesn't last, does it?
Well, interesting. Doris Lessing is a wonderful Nobel-winning author, wrote a science fiction series, which was a 5-part series. And in one of the Shikasta series. And in the Shikasta series, at one stage, the people who've actually sort of, who are the gods, really, are looking down on Earth and said, I think we made a mistake here around sexuality. We made that too strong in human beings. And I think that sexuality can absolutely wreck our lives. It can also enhance, I think it has the potential to be the greatest thing that you merge with another human being, and there's a sense of reaching oneness together. It's like a practice, but it isn't all there is. And I think that sex is a very interesting tool that at some point, again, it's a place of practice. You've got the whole area of tantric practices. I'm not talking about the Western Tantra, I'm talking about the Eastern Tantra, where actually, sex becomes a real meditation practice for becoming awake. Yeah,
true. Well, you touched upon in relationships. I mean, in spirituality, people can have problems, I think, especially if one partner's embracing some spiritual path and the other one is like a bit, I'm not sure. You kind of say the final level, I think you're talking relationships here, is spiritual. It doesn't mean you have to have the same spiritual beliefs as your partner, but you do have to at least respect their leaning towards something larger than the persona. Because this is because I've seen lots of people have this problem where they're kind of, one's off and the other one is like, you're so woo-woo, you're so, and then boom, it goes apart. You must have seen it as well, I guess.
Of course, yeah. And Jung said that actually for a man, and this is in the days when it was man was this and woman was this, it's not quite the same. He said, what's most important is finding that sense of purpose. And I think there's something about it. If our relationships blocks us from living our purpose, I mean, you're living your purpose, I'm living my purpose. I think we're really fortunate to be doing that. But I think that if a relationship was to block me and say, oh, like, you can't go there, I need you here. If you feel trapped, even if it's a loving trap, that you're not actually allowing your energy to go to do what it was you were born to do. What are you going to do with this one wild and precious life, which is what Mary Oliver says. If you don't live that part, you're missing out.
Yeah.
And the world's missing out.
Purpose. I've read what you said about purpose. You said each of us, I have really read your book.
I'm so impressed. It's amazing.
Each of us has something inside of us which is longing to be lived, our unique treasure chest, a set of gifts, an image of our potential of purpose, something that makes us feel, this is why I'm here, this is what I'm meant to be doing. It's more than a simple desire, it's woven into the essence of who we are. So really, this has to find expression somewhere, otherwise we're not really living a life, would you say?
I think that's absolutely right. We've all got, and sense of purpose isn't necessarily, one of the examples I've given in that chapter is about this bus driver who, a bus conductor in the days when they did have bus conductors, who used to sort of like, chat up all the passengers, and he'd make jokes, and he'd sort of acknowledge people. And there was a sort of sense that he was living his sense of purpose. He was bringing light. And I always got off that bus feeling uplifted. Yeah. And there's something about finding out what's your sense of purpose. I mean, someone like Eric Clapton, for example, there's no question he's come through with a fantastic guitarist. And if he was to not live that, he'd be robbing himself and the world of that.
Yeah. And everyone's expression is different. I mean, we've been watching this series called Interior Design Masters, and these people are so passionate. It's a kind of competition thing. And I'm looking at it thinking, yeah, I'm enjoying the program, but actually loath to do that, and I remember going to classes of fiction writing, and I hate it. I dropped out after 2, but non-fiction, I was like diving in, so once we find it, that thread, and for me, it was creativity, and you're off, you're swimming with the dolphins.
I think that's really key, Steve, what you've just said, that creativity is actually, that's where the magic is. If we are living our creativity, we're also living our purpose. And if we're not, it's like maybe we haven't found it yet. But as you say, you can go to classes and study things, but if they're not right for you, you can do all the studying you like. They're never gonna be yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my last bit, which I think is really nice thing to wrap it all up. You talk about Sangha, which is the Buddhist community. You say, at this particular time in evolution, when there is so much chaos around us, I see a great need for the company of fellow pilgrims on our journey through life. We need to surround ourselves with people who truly meet us, who allow us to speak our truth, people with whom we feel safe, with whom we can feel, we can be uncertain in our footing and stumble in our speech in the knowledge we won't be trashed. I mean, this is so important. This is what helped. I mean, Alternatives was such a great Sangha for me for many years.
Amazing.
And there are other ones that we find that we build, and then we find, because it's terrible to feel completely the black sheep of the family or the rainbow sheep of the family. Nobody understands us, you know, and I meet many people who feel totally isolated in their spiritual life, you know. And so having a group or finding that connection is so important.
Yeah, and it's funny, you know, I've just started an online group which I run with Sarah Warwick, who's my ex-partner, and we work far better as friends and co-workers than we did as lovers, and we're great.
Right.
We're great creatives together. Yeah. And we've only got 5 people on this group, and I said, oh, well, maybe we should cancel it. And she said, no, I think we should run it. And we did our first meeting last week, and actually these 5 people, I realized we're on the road to creating a Sangha. And there's a real gift here. This isn't about earning a lot of money from running a group. It's actually about, we can hold a space where people can actually delve deep into themselves. The group's called Get Wise, Get Creative. And there's creative practices, and there's also exploration of spirituality. And I think I'm so pleased I didn't cancel it, because actually these people have come because they really want what we have to offer. And people will come to you because you have something to offer.
Yeah. Well, I think one of your great gifts, Malcolm, is creating Sangha, create community. You created a brilliant space at Alternatives. I think Alternatives was created down to you, I would say, personally.
Thank you, Steve. That's
I mean,
great.
there are a lot of people around but you've always been a great networker, connector, and I think that's the gift that you've really brought amongst many other gifts.
I think that's it. Again, it's in my DNA. You know, I feel, you know, I often, you know, put people together. I do a bit of matchmaking. It's a very Jewish tradition as well, but I do a bit of matchmaking because I like to see people who can connect with other people, get uplifted on a one-to-one level and on a large global level as well.
Brilliant. Well, your website, malcolmstern.com, is going to go out with this podcast, and it's a great pleasure seeing you again. I'm glad you're thriving, and
Thank you, Steve.
It is the book you had to write, Malcolm.
It's so funny because it's like it wrote itself. It's normally taken me 4 years to write a book. I've written 2 other books, and they've taken me 4 years to write. They're not that brilliant, so I'm not even going to plug them. But this one took me, once I got on the trail, it took me 7 months. It just poured out of me. And I worked with a guy called Ben Crave, who's a brilliant ghostwriter. And Ben just captured my voice all the way along the way. And we met, the way we planned this is we met twice a week for 2 hours, from 11:30 to 1:30, Tuesdays and Fridays, and we wrote in that time. And in 7 months, we knocked out the whole book. And it's not lightweight, as you can hear from some of the things you've said. I feel like Melissa's energy was there actually guiding it. That's what I also feel.
Yeah, so I think if anyone is suffering or struggling, then this is the book. There's so many techniques and wisdom around moving through the different variations of suffering we meet in the world. So I highly recommend this book. I was surprised actually reading it. I'm like, oh God, it's brilliant.
Thanks, Steve. I was amazed reading it, but what was amazing was when the endorsements started to come in. So I put it out. Elizabeth Gilbert was deeply touched by it. Jack Cornfield was deeply touched by it. Eckhart. And I realized it was touching people, because what I've written is an unvarnished sense of what has happened to my heart as a result of being thrust into hell and finding my way out again.
Brilliant, Malcolm. Well, look, it's brilliant talking with you. Thank you so much for speaking with me. I'm glad to see you thriving.
Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated.